Golden Visa, did it just get killed yesterday?
Sort of. We were actually, I've been busy on the phone this morning calling different colleagues, lawyers and other real estate agents and developers. And it's sort of still up in the air in the sense that, of course, he's after saying all these lovely things, he's going to do this, this and this, but we really don't know when and how and what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. But more than likely they will end the Golden Visa. Obviously it has to be voted on within the government itself, but the fact that they have the majority probably means that it'll get passed. I have my own sort of feelings about where we are at this stage with the Golden Visa, and also where we are at this stage with the property crisis and the property market and where it is. And to be honest with you, I'm probably not going to do myself any favours, but I think the government's got a lot to play in the problems that we have when they're talking about pricing of houses. They forget to tell everybody that they take about 30% of the value of every house that's sold in between the VAT that is paid, because VAT's non-recoverable for developers, etc. Even on fees, when they pay fees, the VAT that is paid to agents is non-recoverable as well. So that all goes to the government. That and I suppose they're also forgetting among the people that is employed in this sector that pays those that people are going. So I think there's a lot of other things could have been done to sort of ease the crisis. And with the Golden Visa, when it was first brought out, the idea was people could come and invest in property, and for that investment, it was a fast track to a permanent residency by a temporary residency. And I've had a lot of clients that I would say have suffered more than 5, 6, 7, and even 8, 9 years through this whole process, trying to renew their visas and so on and so forth, and following on the promise that the government had given back in 2012. And now it's sort of like it's to blame all these foreign investors to come in and do this, this, and this. Where if the rules had been straight from the start and had been lined out from the start with regards to what people should invest in and so on. And I'll just give you a prime example. In Ireland, we talked about this last week. They had a Golden Visa program, but you had to invest in local housing, government approved local project that supplied housing for locals. And for doing so, and it had to be €1 million, and it had to be that this was over a 10-year period and so on and so forth. But you were tracking your way to a residency as well. And that also ended last week. The Irish program also ended last week. But it was more sort of geared towards the problem of housing rather than just creating money. As in, you'll see how much money that the Golden Visa has raised. I think it's probably in the billions. Yeah. But if you look at the amount of properties that has been sold to Golden Visa, it's minuscule compared to what the local market normally is buying. If you look at over the last, since 2012, so you're talking just over 10 years, there's probably only around 12,000 properties in all of Portugal that's been sold to Golden Visa. So like they're sort of blaming, I think there's a political sort of thing on the rising up properties and so on and so forth. And there is an issue of shortage of housing. And I really believe that this is where the problem is in the municipalities, where they haven't released the planning. I have had one building in Lisbon that took us 5 years to get planning on it. And I have another building that we were just after 3 years told, no, you're not getting planning on that. Yeah. And after 3 years. So, and I know lots of other developers that are in the exact same boat where I know one big developer who was in Lisbon and he was providing a lot of local housing and basically just says, I'm not going to develop in Lisbon anymore because of the issues with inside the camera. I just can't get anything done. And the usual answer is when people are asking, how long will it take? It's the shrug of the shoulders. Nobody knows. And it's always the excuse. Well, look, we're waiting on the camera. Where when you even had the pandemic and everyone was working from home, it was just absolutely impossible to talk to anybody. Impossible. And I still, even today, have projects that I need to see municipalities particularly on, and I can't even get a meeting with the municipalities. So, and I'm not the only one. Every other developer, everyone that's in this kind of box is they got the planning for, and I'm not saying everyone's looking for crazy planning, they're looking for normal houses for local markets, etc., in South Bank and so on. There would be a lot more property to sell, which means that you would have a lot more supply in the market. If they released the EVA or had done something on the EVA that's in the cost, that would also lower the cost of the houses, because at the end of the day, it's the person who's buying the house is going to pay the EVA because it has to come into it. So, yeah, the Golden Visa looked like it's going to end, but I think the government have a lot more to do than just say we're not going to take any more foreign investment for temporary residencies.
Yes, yeah, and it is a complex issue, isn't it? It's not all good or all bad. We've got Veronica here who's making a good point. You know, Golden Visa is a tough one. Move here and live here. I mean, I would support that. You know, there is the criticism, isn't there, that people invest in property that they don't live in, and that's not necessarily good for a community. It's so beautiful here. It's better to live here than just buy a house and not live here. She continues to say, and it has done some. You know, a lot of people will perhaps not the people who are gaining the biggest political advantage from this decision, Bobby, but other more pragmatic people do recognise that it has been an incredible thing for the Portuguese economy and culture.
Yeah, it actually has. It was a fantastic idea at the start. Like I said last week, I forgot to tell everyone about it, but it was a great idea. There was 12 Golden Visas done in year one. 12 applications.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I think year two, it was probably about 1,100. Or something like this. So I actually think it's a bit less. But
hold on, 1,100 altogether?
Yes. In total, you're only talking about 12,000 Golden Visa applications. Maybe 15. It's there. It's not 100,000 or 50,000.
As you might imagine,
yeah. The number of it is actually very, very small compared to other programs. And you've had it's been a political football for the last number of years with regards to the foreigners, they're all making money, the developers are all making money, etc. And to a point, there has been some companies that have geared their business towards Golden Visa market because it was an active market, and the government allowed it to be so. They're now this morning turning around and saying that we don't want people to have AL licenses, but yet in the last exchange of the Golden Visa rules, they said to people, invest in touristic properties. Here, go invest in touristic properties, which ended up, and this is a big part of where you're renting your properties now at €500 a room, because they ended up with an asset that developers were building for a market, which was a 30-year-old property in a rural area or outside of the main areas that they could sell for €280,000. People needed to pay €280,000 to apply for a Golden Visa, and it was rubbish. A lot of times it was absolutely rubbish, but it ticked the box that it qualifies. So the rules that were made that allowed certain companies to work within that framework, I think that destroyed it. I think had they done it where they created a program where they said, okay, let's invest in get investors to invest into a fund that invests in local housing and give tax incentives, not just for local people. And I'm talking about first-time buyers. Give them a tax credit over a 10-year period as an incentive to buy a house. And actually, so in other words, that instead of paying X amount of tax every year, they would get a tax credit over a 10-year, which would be worth about 30,000, 40,000 euros over a 10-year period, which makes a huge difference to somebody trying to buy their first home. So,
absolutely, yeah, which is one of the problems that's being identified here, of course, and that was part of the conversation the government were having yesterday to make it easier for Portuguese people to live in their own, cities and towns of birth and not be priced out by inward investment. That makes utter sense. So you would think, wouldn't you, that the government might talk to a few people in the industry and canvass their ideas? Did they call you?
No.
Funnily enough,
I've called them a few times.
Did you get through?
No.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? There are some great ideas here. Go on, Phil. I mean, Phil, you've got an interesting perspective. You are out there in the sticks in beautiful central Portugal. You would think it would make sense to encourage some inward foreign investment in those parts of the country as well. What's your view on this?
It's funny as regards where I am in Monsanto. I have followed local advice because to try and not follow local advice, and I can't put the local advice I got out on this program, right? Because you know what I'm saying, right? I cannot put it out on this program. However, what I've seen is I've just come from 6 weeks down in Cornwall. This is what I wanted to say, where they have such a chronic problem now of people having holiday homes there, having inflated the prices, and actually they can't find nursing staff for the hospitals because they can't afford to live anywhere near to the hospital for the wages they're being paid against the price they'd have to pay for a rental.
Yeah.
And there has to be, this isn't just a Portugal problem. I think this is a problem in lots and lots of places.
Yeah, yeah. And quite a good solution that Bobby's come up with there, to help people establish or stay where they were born or grew up if they wanted to, rather than getting priced out there. So it would look like it's on the way out. It can't be killed off in an instant, but we can, as you said, there is a political process to go through, and it has been done by the sound of it to get support across the coalition, because that's how it works here, right? Senor Costa, the PM here, will have worked closely, I suspect, with his political colleagues, not actually his direct colleagues in his party, but the others with whom he has to work to get enough power to make changes. And then it goes to be made into law, and the president has to ratify it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of this again. We're not really sure what's going on because it's like, I'm not joking. I spoke to a couple of professionals that I would consider that were very well informed of what's the next steps, and really we just don't know. And one actual particular law firm that I talked to this morning just said, listen, if they pull out of the bag everything that they said, it's going to be an absolute disaster.
Right.
Not just a disaster for, like, say, business, but like you're talking about lots and lots of huge changes here. The one thing that I read, I don't even know if it's true or how it's interpreted, because obviously I read it that was translated from Portuguese to English, and it was that for people making renewals, that either they lived in the house, or their descendants or their children lived in the house, or it was rented in a full-time market. Now, or properties that were empty, that weren't being used, that were going to be taken by the government and rented out over a 5-year period and so on. And it all sounds great. It sounds, oh great, we're going to have a huge supply to the market. But when a lot of people bought their house, like what you're saying, they chose not to put it into a rental market for lots of different reasons. One, I know people who've bought houses, put them into the rented market, and they were wrecked. The houses were wrecked, and they're after spending €1 million on a house that they were trying to get someone to pay the rent. And as you know, the law always gears towards the tenant. I had one particular tenant that sat in a house for over the pandemic, could afford to pay it, but decided, because Antonio Costa says you can't kick me out during the pandemic, I'm not going to pay the rent. Wow. And he proceeded to destroy the house, 30 grand. I couldn't even bring it to court because it would take 2 years to bring him to court. So there's lots of reasons people don't want to rent houses. I'm not saying that that's every tenant. But if I'm after investing €1 million or 500,000 or 600,000 euros into a home that I want to come and live in, and don't forget, the reason a lot of people did the Golden Visa is that they weren't able to come and live today, but they did want to come and live in the future. And they didn't want that asset to be either used or destroyed in that meantime. And all they did was follow the rules that were set out by the government. And now they want to change that law to say that, here, listen, you can't do what you want with your own asset. We're going to decide what you do with it. Now, if the government turned around, as I said, and got the civil servants within the municipality to go to work and actually sit down and go through the papers that they have on their desks and release the planning and define the planning and even tell people what the rules are, then you might actually have, it's a supply and demand situation. You'll have a huge supply of properties because there's thousands upon thousands of properties sitting on people's desks where there's nobody sitting at the desk waiting for planning. And it's true. It's true. And every developer will tell you this, and every real estate agent will tell you this. If you could release this planning, we could sell this. We can sell this. You know, we bought properties, land, 4, 5, 6 years, and still waiting on planning. Now, how do they expect to get direct foreign investment or investors to come in and build houses when they don't give a planning decision for 3 years? The markets can change like this, up, down, whatever way it goes. So you're taking huge gambles, and it's easy to blame the Golden Visa, and it's easy to blame but in essence, the real problem here is the lack of response from the cameras with regards to the amount of properties that they're letting out from planning permissions point of view, and the EVA and how it's treated through developers. It's a cost. It's not an EVA. EVA is normally like something you can write off against them. It's an added tax on top of everything else, which is not a tax on the developer. It's a tax on the end user. It's a tax on the buyer. So if a property goes up 100,000 or 200,000 or so on, I saw something the other day that said for every year that goes by waiting on a planning, they're driving the price up by the government are driving the price up by €500 a square meter because they don't release enough properties into the market. There's a shortfall of over 100,000 units in Portugal as it stands, and they have that sitting on their desk.
That's incredible. Yeah. Well, thank you for your analysis of this. So on the face of it, there's a bit of sort of political theatre going on, isn't there? And as it turns out, whilst one finger's pointing out at the Golden Visa, three are pointing back with things that the government could do to ease this situation, and it is a serious one. We acknowledge that, absolutely. Many workers can't afford to live where they work and face long commute times. That's not good. So ultimately, this is hurting local people rather than helping them. In the UK, it says Salvation Air Force, the agents have increased the rent on one of my investment properties by 35% in under a year. I guess that's another supply and demand illustration there. And the problem that Phil is pointing out seems to happen to nurses, teachers, and actually to lots of other professionals who stop seeking work in any part of the country, who stop seeking work in any part of the country far away from home. I'm not sure exactly what you mean there, Joel, but I do understand certainly that how this affects professional people that are utterly needed in localities, and then they can't get access and be where they want to work and live close to where they work. Not that many people, says Veronica, actually get the Golden Visa as well. So there's another supply issue there. According to the latest data released by CEF at the end of January, yes, 93 main applicants received their Golden Visa, and they haven't been the fastest government office, have they, in dealing with this? We discover week by week, Bobby.
It's been a disaster. Like, I've had people come in and say, look, and this is how it's perceived. Portugal goes to the world and says, listen, come and invest here, and you do this, this, and this, and we'll do that. And I've had so many people leave the program because basically Portugal broke its promise. It did not do what it was going to say. And it made people feel like, and I don't mean this in any disrespect to people who are refugees, but you're meant to feel like you're a refugee coming into this country. You're coming through the airport or whatever it might be, and you're after investing your hard-earned money to invest into a program that the government put out there. And now I've got people that are 7 years in the program still waiting on their second renewal. I've had people that waited over 2 years for an application to be processed. And, so like...
What do you say to them? What did you say? Like, hang on in there, it's worth it in the end, because you are coming to an amazing country. I mean, let's be clear about that. It is worth it, isn't it? But this is really unhelpful.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing from a point of view that, because you go and you tell them, no, this is what they say, it's in the government. Actually, in their own rules, it says, if you don't receive an answer within X amount of days, you can take it that it's a yes, this kind of thing. But not one law firm in the country will turn around and use that, because they know right well that if you upset the wrong people, it comes back and bites you. And that's another part of it. So I would say that the people that have come into the program came in with the open eyes of what was being sold, and what they're getting now is sort of, it wasn't what was sold. They didn't get what they were sold.
And actually, one Golden Visa applicant sued CEF, didn't they? Because they didn't get the meeting they wanted, and that's caused a bit of a stir, I think. And other people have been travelling around thinking they were covered by the Golden Visa, and ended up in difficulties with other border forces elsewhere in Europe. Pretty sorry state of affairs.
Yeah, and you'd have like families on the holidays, and they try to arrange their CEF meetings around holidays in different countries, etc. And they'll get a meeting for one person
of the family,
child. For example,
the
whole family would arrive in the CEF office, and they would turn around and say, hi, we're all here. Is there any chance? No, sorry, just this one.
Wow, incredible. Not helpful, CEF, if you're watching this morning. Best way to do it, apparently, Bobby, is to marry a local. Can you help with that? It's the best method.
It's the new business plan.
Will you be announcing it here on the Good Morning Portugal show? That's fantastic. So it's working behind the scenes. I've planted that.
I've had a few questions from people like that. Is there such a program?
Ask CEF for the Red Book. Is that available partners of the Red Book of available partners that you can marry to move to the country?
I love this Red Book thing. I've written in a few.
Oh, it's this
And
complaints book, the complaints book.
your complaints book. I've written a few of them over the years, and you always get an answer back to say we've reviewed your your comments and we don't agree.
Really? Okay. What do you say? Give me that complaints book again. I wanted to complain about your answer. Wow.
Normally, I shouldn't write in these things, because when I'm at that stage of writing it, it's yeah.
So it's the Livro das Reclamações is the complaints book here. It's a cultural thing here in Portugal, and there are legs for this idea, Bobby, for sure. I'm looking for a local, so perhaps that is a route here. So we've given the Golden Visa news a bit of a bashing this morning, and quite rightly so, it would seem. On to good news. Herdade de Maio is shaping up nicely, and we're looking forward to being at the launch of this. I know, Ian, you saw this and were impressed with this project south of the river. You quite like the cut of this jib, didn't you?
I love the idea that you're building a community, not just houses.
Yeah.
I mean, I live just outside the M25 in north of London, and we've got a big set of developments going on in our village, which will nearly double the size of our village. So, of course, we're lots of people up in arms about that. And really, you look at them and they're not creating communities. They're just building houses. And whereas, you clearly have got that. I mean, the designs look fantastic, but you're building a community that people want to live in, not just bricks and mortar. And that, I mean, the sustainable bit as well that looked really top. And indeed, I think every country now should be insisting that houses are sustainable, house building sustainable.
Thank you, Ian. And to be honest with you, like when we started to build this development, to put it together, we were looking at say, is there any even incentives from a government point of view, from a buyer's point of view, to buy green or to buy. And there's very little. And to be honest with you, there's not even a lot from, say, from the government side of it with regards to incentivizing investment into green energies and so on as well, which I think for a country that's got all this lovely sun, and there should be huge incentives from a European and from a local government point of view for this, because we've all learned now from the cost crisis of the last couple of last 2 years. We didn't feel it as hard as the rest of Europe, because the Iberian Peninsula is sort of isolated from the gas issue, let's say. But we should have a lot more of I think we're 2% of our energy comes from solar. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that there is a target to hit by, I think it's by 2030 of them to hit, and they have a long way to go to hit it. But this project was designed with the idea that it was to make life easier and also inclusive and so on. And we looked at even different options about sharing electricity rather than just having your own electric supply. And even since we spoke last, we've increased the with consultation with the people that know more about solar and energy and all this kind of stuff. We're actually have increased the solar panels by double to ensure that you don't go ending up paying any electrical bill. And that will even allow you to charge two electric cars. And even yesterday we were speaking with I told you last week we were speaking with Mercedes, and we're hoping to launch a car along with the house as well. And you're looking at in the mid 20,000s for a brand new electric car. That can go with the house as well. Now we haven't figured out exactly how it'll work, but with something like this, it allows people to control the cost spend going into the future. And what I believe should happen is that the government should be incentivizing, as I said, young people, young first-time buyers, people that are renting already at these €2,000 a month or whatever. That'll buy a house here easily, But they should be given them tax incentives to do so, to buy in a greenhouse that takes the stress and takes the pressure off of the grid. To a point, but also then it takes them out of that rental market as well. People are paying lots of rents, and like I saw rooms for €500 a month in Lisbon and so on. That's because there's no help for these people other than there's low supply. That's it. And it's all these bad investors that are buying up everything and putting it in the Airbnb. And the other issue is even with the Airbnb, as soon as they start taking out the Airbnb, the cost of the remaining Airbnb is going to rise, and the hotel costs are going to rise because they'll see there's a live market, and that will actually de-incentivize people coming to now what is the affordable tourist destination. So I think there's a lot to be done on the housing side, rather than just turning things off. They need to start turning things on. 2 projects like this.
That's very interesting, that distinction, turning things on instead of turning them off. It's as though these things shouldn't be left to politicians. I don't know. Welcome to Antonio Costa's Portugal, says João F., our Portuguese and friend here, Portuguese friend Bobby O'Reilly. The real problem here is a government that uses absolute majority to install every party boy in higher places. Awesome cynicism here. Taking care of their own lives without having a long-term plan for Portugal. They just navigate on site. The other problem is that this sort of attitude puts a stamp of sheer incompetence and stupidity on all Portuguese. Oh, wow. Although there are quite a lot of us who are competent at their jobs, no question. Look at this. It just hurts my soul. Maybe there's a thing that goes alongside saudade. You know, when you're away and you miss Portugal, it's actually when you live here and your government hurts you as well. I don't know what that is in Portuguese, Joel, but thank you for that input. What do you make of this, Bobby? A sustainable house building costs much more than conventional. Well, the cost is felt somewhere, isn't it? But you know, how would we manage this? Is this subsidy, tax breaks?
Well, that's the thing. I think that they're right that it costs a lot more to build it, because obviously you've got a lot more within the installation and also with the technology and so on. It costs a lot more to build it, but the sustainability of the house itself, it more than pays for itself in a very short period of time based on the cost that you're saving. And it's not just about the electrical saving. It's about the cost of even changing your lifestyle, that, okay, use the train because you're beside it, or use your electric bike, or use your electric car, whatever, that you're now charging for free because of that big yellow thing in the sky, you know? And in Portugal, it doesn't make sense that we're not harnessing this. But the cost of construction, regardless, right across the board, went crazy over the last couple of years. And if you talk about when something goes up in construction, in anything, but when something goes up in construction, let's say even bricks or steel, for example, it doesn't just go up by the cost of the object. It also goes up by the VAT cost on top of that as well. So if it goes up by 20%, it's actually gone up on top of that 23% on top of that as well, which is non-refundable. So like the thing is that it's multiplied again by the taxes increase on top of any cost increase. And I think if the government were looking at really seriously at the price of housing and affordable housing, they have to look at more taxes, in other words, more properties, and taking smaller taxes off of more, and actually creating a much larger supply. There you will have a correction in the market very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. But the market is going to be supply and demand always.
Yeah, they need to be talking to you and other, wise thinkers in this field. Why don't politicians think about that? I think I know the answer to that. Let's not go into that. What a brilliant position Portugal is in, and I think very wise of her to choose.
I think another reason is because there are so many people coming from the States as well now. So that is also, I mean, we all know that Portugal's making it really quite easy for foreign nationals to come, D7 visas and things like that. I know the Golden Visa looks like it's ending, but the D7 is the predominant sort of, way people are coming into the country. So that's another reason why Portugal's been chosen for that launch, because, basically the country is open up, it's easy to get in.
Yeah, I got to talk to you about this Golden Visa thing. There's a bon dia Veronica from Cindy, and a congratulations, Carla.
Cindy was in real estate in America also. So we always talk about builders, developers, and talk about real estate stuff. So, and yes, congratulations, Carl.
Yeah, I think Cindy's got a friend called Carla, because however hard she tries to write Carl,
it keeps coming with Carla. She must have something in her phone. She must have a really good friend called
Unless
Carla.
This is something we don't know about Carl, and that's the versatility that the Red Agency really like about him.
Well, you have a friend called Carla. So Cindy, clarify that. Carla, is there something going on with Carla?
That's coming out on the predictive text.
Yeah, or her friend Carla has just had some great news or something, like Veronica says.
Oh yeah, we have seen. Oh yes, of course. She's just tagged her friend Carla, and it's nothing to do with me or other Carl here on the screen this morning. This
Carls, be careful.
Real estate people here. This golden visa thing, they're at it again, aren't they? Newspaper story. Golden visa finishes next Tuesday, which can't possibly happen anyway, let's face it. No. But this is just sensational headlines in the press saying that that will be talked about and is likely to end as of next Tuesday. It can't possibly, can it? Let's start with you, Carl, on that. It must have sent a little bit of a reverberation around the industry in Lisbon.
Well, it has, yeah. But I mean, we did have the Prime Minister was it October or November? Let it slip. I think for me, it's one of those, I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, it looks like it probably is coming to an end, but you really don't know what to expect. It could just be that there's going to be significant changes to it. I mean, why end it completely? Maybe they can just tweak the rules, make it, I don't know, where the investment is larger or, again, different regions. So I think until it happens, nobody really knows, because it has been, it's going, it's not going. It's going to go in 1 year, it's not going.
Nothing
not necessary for a lot of people that are going to buy. Like if you're going to buy and live here, right? Like Carl, if they're going to come to you and buy a house and live in it, they don't.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you've got to think that the people that are sort of just started the process. I mean, I don't think they can just stop it and say, hey, next Tuesday it stops and that's it. People have already started to make their investments. They put a deposit down on a project or are working through it. So maybe they'll announce the end of it, and maybe they'll say, look, it's at the end of 2023, or it's going to be in the summer, something like that. I mean, I think until it happens, nobody's really sure. But yeah, it creates a lot of uncertainty, and certainly if you're thinking about a golden visa to come to Portugal, well, at the minute you're just not going to make a move on that.
Exactly. That's why it's very harmful. That's why it's not a good way to manage this, in my view. Veronica,
just come out and say this is what's going to happen.
But Marge has got an interesting one, that hotel, right? She's got a hotel you can buy into that's part of like the renovation.
Rossio Palace. Yeah, Rossio Palace. I actually spoke about this on the show a few months ago. Yeah, so that's a typical sort of example where, if you've got somebody who was perhaps about to make that investment and that is a great project. I mean, if it was me, you're going to hold back for a little while and say, well, let's see what happens with the golden visa situation. So I think the government really does need to come out and clarify those rules so that people know, because we're not talking, a couple of €1,000 here. People are making, big investments, hundreds of thousands of euros.
Exactly.
Some guarantees if they're going to do that. So, yeah, I think it's a mistake, but that's just my humble opinion.
I think it also be that they're wanting people who live here. I mean, that was the intent, is that the Chinese were coming in, buying a bunch of these buildings and not living in them. And so you already have an issue where you've got, a lack of supply of, housing within a decent price range in Lisbon, right? And then the rentals, and these things are sitting there open. And nobody's living in them. So, I mean, I think your locals walk around and see that, as well as the ones that the inheritance law, right? They're just sit on them because.
I mean, there's something like 700,000 properties in Portugal that are vacant. So there's actually no shortage of properties. It's just the fact that, that's one of the major problems is, the inheritance tax laws here, the way the inheritance laws, the way it works is, if you've got 4 siblings, and they inherit the family home. If one of those siblings doesn't want to sell for any reason, or they've fallen out, anything, then that house isn't going to get sold. All have to be in agreement. That's my understanding of it. So you can imagine how many properties are just sat there.
It's ridiculous.
Away,
ridiculous. They're annexing them when they're falling over, but then it's too late. Versus annexing one. We had a client, an investor, that was trying to build it because she rehabs them. She does a beautiful job at rehabbing. She doesn't need the money. She does it because she loves it. And the city made them sell the property. And then, long story on it. But anyway, it was ridiculous because our client wanted to even go over asking. They didn't even give the option. They just dumped it. It's just like, our client.
Well, if you drive around Lisbon, wherever you go, you see these beautiful old buildings. And, I renovated a few properties in the UK before I came here. And I'm a sucker for those sort of old buildings, you know, and you drive past them and think it's such a shame because they're on virtually every road, you know, particularly in some neighborhoods. You think, what a shame, what a waste, you know. I mean, it's spectacular buildings, you know, not just, you know, the sort of thing you see today, things with high ceilings and all these sort of ornate moldings and all that, and the beautiful facade with the tiles. And it is just such a shame. Maybe they'll do something about that. I mean, I think they should incentivize people to renovate, you know, and get some more stock on the market.
Or just annex them. You annex them, sell them, and you give the property, you give the money to the owner, and just say
I've got mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, but when you let them go to rot and they're melting and they're literally crumbling on the streets. And I know we all have like property rights and whatnot, but when you're talking about 10 family members that are just fighting and being greedy, and it doesn't have, you're still in a community.
It's hard, and I see your point. It's hard. I'm sort of a hands-off kind of government person, really. You know, I don't like them to get too involved. But I know something they did in the UK a few years before I left. There was a problem with people holding onto homes, and if a home was not occupied, then you didn't pay what we call council tax in the UK. So that may be something like £1,500, £2,000 a month, a year. Sorry. So what they did, they changed those rules so that even if the place was empty, you would have to still pay that local government tax, and that was sort of a way to nudge people towards getting those houses renovated and onto the market to get some more housing stock on there. So there are ways that they could possibly do it, and you know, if a building's vacant, put a tax on it, and then that will motivate people maybe to say, hey, look, let's get it sorted, let's get it sold, and you know, let somebody make it into a beautiful home, because there's.
Tell you what, they'd make a killing in
rent it. Why can't they rent it? Why let it go to ruin? You know, why let it get to that point? If you have 10 people fighting over the property while it's still in good condition, say, okay, so while we make a decision, let's at least rent it out so that there's a housing solution for a community like Lisbon that has a huge housing situation.
Yes, so some maybe do, but I mean, you can imagine in a large family, the trials and tribulations, shall we say, if you've got 4 or 5 siblings.
Or 10.
Here's your example. This isn't just siblings. This is cousins and all sorts, isn't it? However, it only takes 20 years to get these sorts of things sorted out. So it's not that bad.
No, they're still counting.
Oh, right. Okay.
20 years.
It just takes 20 plus years. You know, it is a fascinating debate. Absolutely. We've got a great question in, which you may be able to help us with, both Carl and Veronica. And and by all means, do keep your comments coming in about this golden visa thing. I noticed the article that I had has been withdrawn from the Portugal resident. Anyway, that link is no longer available. So I don't know why that is or why that would be. That's quite unusual. And that stokes my conspiracy theory fires nicely. Anyway.
The press does not print everything. There's a lot of stories that should be printed that I'm seeing as my old, Orange County Register, person, that I'm like, why wasn't that printed or publicized? Like, that's important news. And
then things that shouldn't be, like great big advertorials, whatever. But the Chinese just park wealth in property and speculate in the rise in values. And if the system lends itself to that, people will do that, won't they, investors? How many, this is the great question from T-Duck here, how many Americans are actually living in Portugal? Already it was around 9,000. The most recent statistic, 6,000, aren't they? We don't even make the top 10 list. Number 10 is Italians at around 12,000. So T-Duck says, don't drive in Lisbon.
Don't drive in Lisbon, I agree.
What do you think, Veronica?
Please excuse me.
Okay, Mrs. M, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
I'll be back with coffee.
Oh, excellent. Good for you.
Oh, can you get me some? Mine's getting...
Veronica, do you have any sugar, Veronica?
Sorry?
A sugar for you or honey?
I'm from California. It's stevia.
It's got to be stevia in that. Have we got any stevia? No, we have.
I have a plant. You actually grow it yourself, so you don't have to have the chemicals.
We do have stevia plants. We just haven't harvested them or grown them yet. Carl Hyde, is it a Nescafe for you, Manchester style?
I'm a Nescafe Gold Blend man, so not very refined, I'm afraid.
That's not coffee.
Yeah, but, I'll buy something about Nescafe Gold Blend. I went to the supermarket last week, and when I arrived in Portugal, or let's say a little over a year ago, it was £6 for the €6 for the 200-gram jar. But yesterday or the day before when I went in, it's doubled in price. It's now €12 for a jar of coffee. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, it's now
you get the beans.
Brand.
You get the beans in a grinder, and it grinds it.
He's grown up. He's grown up. We were subjected to some serious propaganda about Gold Blend, weren't we? We just thought it was posh when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So now some of us.
I'm used to the flavour. And listen, I think if I had ready access to proper tea bags, I'd be drinking tea. I've sort of given up on that now. It's unless I'm going to the Algarve to one of the British supermarkets and I can stock up and get a year's supply. But no.
Make us a brew, lad. Okay, so Lee McGrady will have a coffee as well. Good morning to you, Lee. And we were saying earlier on, he was missing the gardening show, so we would like to see you on at least once a week, Lee, with a gardening tip in the morning. When you're having your coffee and cigarette,
I'm getting my stevia.
Oh, she's going for a stevia. Fantastic. Oh, excuse me. How many Americans do you think then are in Portugal, Lee? Have you seen any figures? 6,000 was what I saw in the most recent government figures.
I mean, I don't know how many there, but that's going to change because
isn't it just?
There's no let up in the numbers that are coming. I think if anything, there'll be more year on year from what I see. Oh,
she's actually got a stevia. Hold it up to the camera there, Veronica.
He's very sad. I think I forgot to water him. Yeah. So these leaves, they look sweet at the moment. Diesel leaves, and they're super sweet, and so it's a natural form of sugar. And you can get the stevia packets, but they're processed. So these little leaves, you can just take one and mash it, and especially if you're using the whole leaf tea, you just put it in your little tea strainer gizmo thing. You just smash them, and he's like 10 times sweeter than sugar. And it's completely natural.
Carl is thinking, like back in the day when we've worked on building sites or been in the company of men, if we got our stevia leaves out on site, we would find ourselves probably gaffer taped to some scaffolding in no time, wouldn't we?
It's a tea and 4 sugars if you're on a building site. So.
Tea and 4 sugars. Otherwise, you get cable tied to some passing vehicle.
Yeah. Well, the sugar industry was quite huge, right? I mean, that ruled the globe for a long time.
Oh, so true. So true. Oh, it's a horrible history, isn't it, sugar? For no question about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to this idea of how many Americans there are. Was this life's too short to grow?
You're not the ones driving up real estate thunder, Doc.
Well, let's say that.
Advertorial on the front page of a newspaper. We saw it, and it says, "Oh, the Americans are coming." It was an advertisement on the front page of a newspaper. And it said when the first line, the lead is the name of a company, that's how you know they've paid for it. So-and-so company went around California doing conferences for 6 months, and they got one person to buy in Portugal. Yeah, that matches the lead of Americans are driving up prices. No.
Well, I think that there may be some contribution, but it's certainly not anything like people are imagining. However, for the
Canadians are here too.
Yes, it's the Canadians, the quiet Canadians. It's them.
We love the Canadians. We love it.
There's always a lot of Brazilians coming as well. So, the Brazilians market. Wealthy Brazilians like to come to Portugal.
Absolutely. For safety. Because they left during the Salazar regime, right? So a bunch of the Portuguese went down to Brazil. And then now they're all coming back.
Just grandparents and things like that for those kind of reasons. I mean, I don't know the exact rules around it, but basically, I imagine if you've got grandparents or great grandparents, then you're going to be entitled to a Portuguese passport at some point, maybe. So
Well, they have a super tight relationship with Brazil, so they're in.
There's a hell of a lot of them coming too. So this, Americans are driving up prices. It's just it's garbage.
At the moment, however, it may well be true in years to come, is what I would suggest.
Well, we know it won't be other cultures, and we won't say who, but there's certain bargainer people.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if I should draw you on that or not there, but I do think the Americans will be making quite an impact before long. And remember where you heard that first. Would you agree with that?
Well, my girl that I pass all my elites to locally here, she's number one in all of Portugal. And that is mostly Americans and Canadians, some Australians, Singapore. But those leads are coming here, and their dollar does go further, right? It just does.
That's right.
When you've got a $2 million home in California, and you come over here to pay 400 or 500. It's like, pfft.
Yeah, and look, it's not just. I mean, they are bringing money with them, but they're also, this is not just people who are retiring. There are people coming here with new ideas and ideas for businesses and things like that. So there's also that benefit for Portugal. People would bring in ideas from the States and from other countries. You know what I mean? That can sort of push it on and maybe help improve the economy in other ways. So it's just it's oversimplified a lot, and obviously it's in the media. So it gets some negativity. But it's certainly not like that. People, they're bringing a lot of money with them, but also ideas. So.
But it's not the media; it's advertising.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, but those sometimes are hard to discern the difference between the two, right?
No, it's easy when if it's on the front page of the newspaper above the fold, and the first thing it does is say how great a company is. What journalist do you know that would ever do that? Journalism 101. Come on, I was in the Society of Professional Journalists. You don't do this. You label it advertorial, and it goes like on page 20.
Yes, yep, fair enough. Or the wrapper on the outside, but then you know what you're dealing with, right? I think it's fascinating. I really do. My boyfriend's biggest clients, not mine, but Victoria's.
I was going to say you have a boyfriend.
Are wealthy buyers from Brazil. I used a little journalistic trick there myself, you see. I start the sentence, my boyfriend, and everyone goes, what? Carl, this is him? My boyfriend. I'll do that again.
Boyfriend.
Yes, my boyfriend's biggest clients, that would be Victoria, are wealthy buyers from Brazil, France, Netherlands, and Germany. So there's a little more insight from the front line there. And to put it into perspective, says James, at 10,000 people, Americans would represent 0.10% of the total population, as in 0.1% there. So yes, I think it's fascinating. Of course, the numbers of immigrants doesn't necessarily reflect the number of in terms of investment, does it? Because you can have a small amount of people with a lot of money, which would create a somewhat different picture. But it's
quantify, because my buyers that are coming over are like 200 to 650. Yeah, there's not that many $1 million homes in the East Algarve.
Okay, interesting.
Homes, you just don't have the price tag.
Not yet, but it's no accident that the Red Agency have chosen to be in Portugal, right? That's in anticipation of more American interest, presumably, Carl.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, they're going to be, they're expanding worldwide. But yeah, I mean, it's a great place to start. There is an influx. I think it's probably easier from what I read. I don't know the rules of other countries, but from what I read, I think it really is sort of the easiest place to get a foothold in Europe. It's Portugal. Yes. with the D7. I mean, it's open invite basically. So yeah, for that reason, it is a good place for them to start. So. Yeah.
And the taxation, because Spain isn't too difficult to get residency. I have a lot of friends that have gone to Spain, but their taxation is horrific. So it's kind of twofold there with
NHR status and things like that. So there's a lot of benefits people coming here. So yeah, a great place for the agency to start.
Yeah, well said.
And prior to this agency, Coldwell Banker was an American agency.
Yeah, there are a lot of. I mean, all the big brands came from the States originally, so.
And you would be mad, as an American real estate company, you'd be mad not to have an office in Portugal. No question about that, right?
Well, they're franchises. So you can buy a franchise. So the Abacus family was doing a luxury brand, and then they picked up the Coldwell Banker brand because it's so well known globally. But like to your point, so is Century 21 and all of these others. So there's that comfort level. And I think this is where Carl is going to get a really good foothold in with that luxury market, with this brand, the agency, with the Netflix show, and it'll be great. You're going to have so much fun with that.
We look forward to hearing how this develops, Carl. People, why do you still give any importance to a great majority of the Portuguese press? And we should note that the story, the article, as it turns out, it is a story, in the Portugal Resident, was lifted from a Portuguese newspaper, which I think João F is referring to. Good morning to you, bom dia, João F. Tudo bem? They are not in the business of telling the truth. They're in the business of selling newspapers. What? You go on to say, and as it turns out, and as I speak as a Portuguese, most of today's journalists are ignorant. So there we've heard it from the horse's mouth of the Carvalho of João Ferreira there. My boyfriend, Victoria's that is a Portuguese builder in the Algarve with that insight into those
We have
nationalities.
to hook up, Victoria.
Yep. Get in touch.
What part of Algarve? It's a big place. It's like saying Southern California.
Portimao, as I understand it. Thank you very much, Mrs. M. Coffee's here. Why don't immigrants, expats form cooperatives to purchase local housing for affordable housing for young people in the area? Rent will pay for maintenance and not profit, a way to give something back. Great idea. Of course, in any forward-thinking community, this would be a perfect and brilliant idea, Garvo. Let's keep that on the table. You're too kind to journalists. I don't think they're ignorant. I think they're paid off, which is quite, I mean, on one level, you could say it's quite sensible. They've got mortgages to pay, haven't they? But let's understand what's actually really going on. And thank you for your insight on that, everybody, this morning. A couple more questions then in the last remaining minutes. Are you okay for a couple of minutes? Because we've got
for sure.
What do you think about a downturn? Oh, let me just. Yes, for sure. And then she disappears. Raquel, question: what do you think about a downturn in the rental economy in Portugal in 2023? Some economists are saying Portugal is very overpriced in rentals and sales. What are your thoughts on this? She lives in the epicenter of that in Cascais. What do you think about this?
Yes. It's well, you know how the market goes, right? Bull bear. It's more of the same. So I do think that there are areas that are very specifically overpriced. Cascais is certainly one of them. Lisbon is certainly one of them. I think that, but that's not necessary. I mean, I always have a positive outlook. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a crazy bad thing to someone who lives here, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But this range of prices will drive away people from these urban centers. People will have to start looking into more rural areas, interior areas, and that is going to drive more people, and certainly the expat community, which does not mind at all to go away from the urban centers and that think that everything is close, even if it's 1 hour away. It is going to drive people more to spread people into the more interior areas. What I'm most concerned about is the services industry, like the people that don't, the low income people that make the country work, the restaurant people, the services people, the Uber guy, those are the ones that I'm concerned with, because those have to still be in the urban centers to work and to give these industries people to work with. In construction, we have a huge lack of people to work in construction. Those people I work with, I am worried about. And those people, what I see is that instead of looking for apartments, they are now looking for rooms. Okay, and I've seen families that were in an apartment and that now have to spread into different rooms, like one rents a room here, another one rents a room there, and that's very sad. And so I hope that is going to be a correction there. I don't think, like anything, you can't keep getting higher and higher and higher without it bursting. And I think that if it gets to a stage where it's going to have to take some measures, some other type of measures to keep servicing people that have to be living in the centers, in the urban centers, but cannot afford to do that right now. Because if you drive those people away, they won't have the money to get inside the city. And we have transportations and more areas, like here in Cascais and in Lisbon, the public transportation is free for some people. Here in Portugal, in Cascais, the transportation is free for residents. In Lisbon, it's for students and pensionists and all of that stuff. And I think that's going to have to be, it's going to take some measures of that sort of area to maintain the people that have to work here and that cannot afford to stay here in the centers.
Well said.
I think it's going to be correct.
Yeah, I think there's a serious session of ministers on Tuesday where I'm told, or I've heard, the Golden Visa will be revoked, or at least the legislation set in motion to do that. and some progressive building and public housing subsidy policies coming to the fore. So there is some sort of a response going on. As
it
to
has to be.
OLP, there's another part to this, and I think you alluded to it, Raquel, in your answer there. But there are a lot of other places in Portugal, aren't there, to look at? And, Portugal can be, in some ways, a sort of victim of its own success if you look at those hotspots. And if from afar you're looking at those hotspots, you're thinking, oh, my goodness, we'll never be able to afford to live there. But there's so many other cities and towns that you might consider. I mean, we were looking at the Alentejo yesterday, just as a little bit of research about other places, more rural places to live in Portugal. We love central Portugal. We're in tomorrow at the weekend. If you dare go and live in the Alentejo on the Spanish border, what would now cost you 350, 400,000 here on the Silver Coast? That sort of home, and these are beautiful homes with Portuguese/Spanish influences near river beaches in beautifully warm parts of Portugal. You can still buy a home for 150,000, 200,000, 250,000 in the Alentejo. So it's still possible, isn't it? But it really depends on where your attention is and whether you get caught up in these little sort of hurricanes of property.
Exactly. And there's so much beauty in those places because it's a little bit more, of course, untouched. And so it's more down to earth, more truthful to the nature and to because here, for instance, here in Cascais, you can hardly hear Portuguese anymore. You walk on the street, you can hardly hear Portuguese. I'm serious. If you go to Alentejo or to Leiria or to whatever, as long as not on the hurricane center of the touristic areas and of the expat places, it's so beautiful to see that it's very much untouched still. And so that's a wonderful thing to see.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. So OLP, cast your net a bit further, possibly. And as a wealthier, immigrant coming in, you'll be able to live remotely. Obviously, you'll need transportation to live that sort of life, but it's still possible. Don't get too unnecessarily concerned, unless, of course, your dream is to be living in the downtown of Porto or Lisbon or Cascais or something like that. That is changing, and as Raquel said there very wisely, it's bare bull, isn't it? It can't go on like it is. But who knows when it's going to change? We never really know, do we? And we don't know what else is going on in the world. Raquel, you've been amazing.
Thank you.
And we're past 10 o'clock, so thank you for bearing with us. Really, really appreciate that.
Thank you.